Jayhawk fans, you are listening to the KC Sports Authority podcast with your hosts, Keegan Russell and Spencer Gray. The college basketball season is coming to an end, and your Kansas Jayhawks have wrapped up the 2022-2023 season. And in today's episode, Spencer and I are going to recap the season, discuss the Big 12 awards that were just released today, and look ahead to the Big 12 tournament, and maybe touch on the NCAA tournament too. So sit back, enjoy, and let's start talking some KU basketball. Spencer, how you doing, man? It is great to be on here with you, and I'm excited to talk our favorite sport, college basketball, and our favorite team, the Kansas Jayhawks. How you doing?
Yes, sir. Doing good, doing good. Excited for March.
It is officially March, and that means March Madness is upon us. That also means, unfortunately, the college basketball season, the regular season, has come to an end, and that means the Jayhawks season is officially over. But they did wrap up quite an impressive season considering how much they lost coming out of last year. The Jayhawks cap off the season going 25-6, and once again winning the Big 12 tournament outright, surprisingly, which we'll get into. But they do win the Big 12 regular season championship outright, beating Texas by a game. So that is the 17th Big 12 title under Bill Self since he's taken over, 17 in 20 years, which has got to be one of the most impressive stats we have ever seen in college basketball, and one that maybe outside of Gonzaga and Mark Few may not be ever surpassed in a 20-year span. So Spencer, let's just kind of reflect back on the season. Give me some of your overarching thoughts on the year. What impressed you? What disappointed you? And just give us as a fan base kind of your impression and thoughts for the season.
Well, I think kind of you alluded to it already, just how much we were able to accomplish with as much as we lost. I mean, this was supposed to be a rebuild year, a down year, whatever you want to call it, but the expectations weren't as high as I think they have been in the past couple years. But everyone really stepped up this year. I mean, Jalen obviously was fantastic. DeJuan was great. McCullar was great. Getting him as a transfer was honestly season saving. And then obviously Grady came in and did a really good job. And I think if you're a Jayhawk fan, you got to be as happy as you can be because this team definitely exceeded all expectations and could, be geared for a pretty deep run this year in March, which I'm not sure a lot of people were expecting before the season started.
So let's step back a minute to the beginning of the season. I don't know if you remember your exact predictions. I don't think we placed a win-loss prediction on the season, but do you think this team finished where you expected them to? Did they finish ahead of where you expected them to? What were your preseason thoughts and how that comes full circle now with finishing as Big 12 champs?
Well, I definitely didn't think we'd win the Big 12 regular season. I thought it was too deep this year. Texas was a lot to be good. Baylor. So I definitely didn't think we were going to win the conference, and I also didn't think we'd be a one seed prediction going into the tournament. I definitely thought, you know, I could see us being a 2, 3, 4, but I definitely didn't see us being one of the 4 1 seeds this year, which obviously that's not locked, but it pretty much is. So yeah, they definitely exceeded my expectations in those. I didn't think by any means it would be a miss the tournament kind of year, but I definitely thought it would be one of those where especially in the tough non-conference, I thought we were going to have a couple early losses and then, finish, second or third in the Big 12, which obviously we did not. My main concerns were shooting. I thought our spacing would be not very great the entire year. And of course, so like he always does, adjust to his roster and made it work. And, a lot of people improved, especially KJ and DeJuan. So that definitely propelled us, I think, to a different place than where a lot of people thought. And again, getting McCullar as the transfer, I think definitely was the thing that kind of pushed us over where we were supposed to be. So yeah, again, I can't complain. I definitely was predicting a quote unquote down year for Jayhawk standards.
And it's funny that our down year, and Jayhawk fans, we say this every single year when it's a down year. Our down year still usually ends up with a top three seed in the tournament, a top three finish in the Big 12 regular season, usually a decent showing at the Big 12 tournament. and usually still have a player on our team that has an impressive season. And that was still the case this year. We lose 70% of our rotation and point scoring last year, have a lot of new faces that step into the team this year. Talk about Kevin McCullough being probably one of the most significant transfers
Hmm.
KU's had since Bill Self. And I know the transfer game hasn't really been a big thing until the last few years, so there's not a lot of history to compare that with. But Kevin McCullough, huge addition. So I think this team did perform quite well. I do think there were areas where they outperformed their expectations, and I think there were areas where we definitely knew the weaknesses coming into the season certainly showed up. Even though KJ Adams had an impressive year, obviously we got dominated a handful of times in the paint, didn't always rebound the ball the best. Play the five spot the best. Shooting was a struggle, especially if Grady Dick wasn't hitting and Jalen was going cold. So we still saw some of those glaring issues we saw coming into the season and predicted might slow them down. But still, Bill Self maybe has his most impressive coaching season yet. I think you could definitely argue this is his best season as a coach he's had since coming here, mostly because he had to play a different game this year. Um, Lacked the consistent top end talent that we're used to seeing with Kansas. Um, but like you had mentioned, he had a lot of adjustments this year, and there were several times in press conferences too where he mentioned that they're going to be changing the way we've done things from the past. Haven't had the high low action in a long time, haven't had the traditional big this year that we're used to seeing. Different kind of looking team, and they still find a way to get it done, going 25-6, landing that 17th Big 12 regular season title in 20 years. And Spencer, a question I want to pose to you because I've seen this going around Twitter the last couple weeks. Um, where do you think Bill Self ranks as far as all-time regular season coach? Postseason aside, because we know March Madness has to be one of the hardest championships to win, but just the dominance he's had in his 20 seasons at Kansas, where do you think that places him, his legacy wise, with the all-time coaches?
Well, if it's, I mean, if we're just talking regular season, I can't really think of anyone who comes relatively close to the amount of dominance that Bill Self has had, because not only is it been consistent and sustained, it's also been in a really hard conference. Big 12 is not, it's not the Mountain West or the AAC or any of the, like Gonzaga, and you see them dominating every year. It's because they have really 1 to 2 competitive schools in that conference per year. With us, there's always somebody. There's always, Texas or Oklahoma or OSU, Iowa State. It's always a tough conference. So for him to have such sustained dominance in such a competitive place, I think it's, if we're just talking regular season, I can't think of someone that comes close to him. I mean, obviously Coach K and Izzo and all them, but even with them, we don't see that sustained dominance. Michigan State will have down years. Duke will have down years. We're right in the middle of one of them, even though Coach K is not here. But really, with us, 17 of the last 20 years, and the three that were the off years. Even then, I mean, it was never a situation where we were missing the tournament. We were hard to watch. We were sub 500. So yeah, I don't think anyone comes close to Mr. Bill.
Yeah, he has. I was looking at some stats the other day. I believe he is second only to John Wooden with the highest regular season winning percentage. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to give you the stat because I know I'm going to botch it, and of course I wasn't prepared to pull it up. But I believe Bill Self's all-time winning percentage is like 79.5%, and John Wooden was like 80 to 81. I might be
Right.
wrong with that. Um, but then you look at his winning percentage at home, and he's won close to like 87% of the games at home. He has more Big 12 regular season championships than home Big 12 losses and home losses combined in that 20-year stretch. So definitely
Wow.
has to be considered as one of the all-time greats from a regular season coaching perspective. I don't want to talk too much about, postseason because again, the tournament is one of the hardest tournaments to win. You got to go 6 games. You got to have your best night 6 times in a row and hope you don't catch the other team on one of their best nights. But definitely an impressive coaching season from Bill Self, especially considering how deep this league was this year. I think everybody knew coming into the season the Big 12 was going to be a gauntlet, but I don't think anybody felt this confident that literally every single night, all 10 teams could win any given night and push it to the wire every single night. I mean, we saw even Texas, who we beat at home, they crush us on the road. Even just this week in Iowa State, who lost one of their players and had kind of been on a downhill right now, they go out and crush Baylor on the road. Just a impressive Big 12 tournament coming up that's really going to showcase the best basketball conference in America, in my opinion. And the fact that Bill Self was still able to wrap up the season with at least a game to go as Big 12 outright Big 12 champs, even with that 6-3 stretch we went through. It's just in my books, this has got to be his most impressive, maybe if not regular season total, his most impressive Big 12 run, considering how deep this season was with the Big 12, especially teams like K-State who came into the year with 2 players on their active roster, brand new coach, no high expectations whatsoever, and they're going to finish as a top 15 team.
Right.
Maybe a few disappointment. Oklahoma's kind of disappointing. West Virginia here and there was disappointing, but overall, the Big 12 by far the best conference in college basketball. And I think the fact that KU was able to find a way to win it outright and finish at the top, given that this wasn't their most talented team or even the deepest team in the league. I think on paper you could argue Texas and Baylor are more talented, but KU still finds a way, and I think a lot of that is to Bill Self's credit in this coaching staff. But speaking of the Big 12, let's talk about the Big 12 awards, which just dropped today. So at the time of this, it is Sunday, March 5th, and the Big 12 awards dropped earlier today. So I'm going to run through these and then we'll talk about how you felt, who finished where, and especially how the Jayhawks did. So the Big 12 tournament or the Big 12 awards list is filled with quite a few Jayhawks. Player of the year, we'll start there. This wasn't even close. This was unanimous. 100% everyone voted Jalen Wilson player of the year. Jalen finished at 19.7 points, led the conference in scoring, led the conference in rebounding, and was probably the most consistent player in the league, even considering he had a couple down games. The fact that he was voted unanimous shows how much the other coaches in this league believe he's the best player in the league. Defensive player of the year also goes to a Jayhawk, and that is DeJuan Harris. The Big 12 had quite a few guys that you could easily argue were the best defender, and KU probably had 2 of them with McCullough as well. But DeJuan Harris finishes the year as the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. Sixth Man of the Year went to Sir-Jabari Rice out of Texas, who destroyed us yesterday, going 9 of 13 from the field on his senior night. Not a surprise there. I think he was probably the best scorer off the bench in the Big 12, and I think that's evident in him winning the award. Big 12 Newcomer of the Year. This went to Keontae Johnson at K-State, who had a fantastic season, probably neck and neck with Jalen for Big 12 Player of the Year, at least in consideration for it. Freshman of the year went to Keontae George out of Baylor, who also had a very impressive season as a freshman. Shot the lights out against Kansas specifically, as most teams tend to do for some reason. But Keontae George had quite the impressive season there. Grady Dick was in the running, but I think George had the more consistent season all year there. KJ Adams, though, he wins the award for most improved player in the Big 12, and I think that was a no-brainer considering how he was pretty much a non-factor last year, except for a few key moments defensively, and he just exploded on the scene early, kind of faded down the stretch, but definitely an impressive season. And then the one that shouldn't shock anybody, unless you're a really diehard KU fan, and that is Coach of the Year, Jerome Tang from K-State, first season. Rightfully so. They had a very impressive season, finished well above their projections. I think you could still argue the fact that Bill Self won the league outright with the team he had should still have been in consideration, but I don't think there was any consideration from the coaching staff across the Big 12 that Jerome Tang should have been the guy other than anybody else. So Jerome Tang gets that, rightfully so. And then as we look at the all Big 12 teams real quick, all Big 12 first team, Adam Flagler out of Baylor. Actually, before I get into this, the Big 12 first team had no big guys. These were all guards and wing players, which is, I think, one of the first time that's ever happened, too. But Adam Flagler out of Baylor, Jalen Wilson, of course, Keontae Johnson from K-State, Marquise Noel from K-State, and Marcus Carr from Texas. All Big 12 second team, Keontae George out of Baylor, Gabe Kalsher from Iowa State, Grady Dick from Kansas, Damian Baugh and Mike Miles from TCU. And then all Big 12 third team, LJ Cryer from Baylor, Kevin McCullough from Kansas, Caleb Boone from Oklahoma State, Jabari Rice from Texas, and Eric Stevenson from West Virginia. A couple other Jayhawks did make the all Big 12 honorable mention list. So if there was a third team, they would have made that. I'm sorry, a fourth team, and that was KJ Adams and DeJuan Harris. Then just real quick, the Big 12 all defensive team, two Kansas Jayhawks on there. No surprise, DeJuan Harris, Kevin McCullough. Then we also saw Gabe Kalsher from Iowa State, Marquise Duval out of K-State, and Musa Cisse, the first big on any of these lists. Big 12 all newcomer team, Keontae George from Baylor, Jaron Holmes from Iowa State, Grady Dick out of Kansas, Keontae Johnson out of K-State, and Jabari Rice from Texas. And then lastly, the Big 12 all freshman team, Keontae George from Baylor, Tamin Lipsey from Iowa State. And I'm going to be honest, I don't remember seeing that guy all season, so don't have anything to really add there. Grady Dick out of Kansas, of course. Milos Uzan out of Oklahoma, who also I couldn't tell you anything about his season. And then the impressive Pop Isaacs out of Texas Tech. So those are your Big 12 awards. Spencer, let's start with Player of the Year. Was there any doubt in your mind that this was going to go to anyone else other than Jalen Wilson?
No, I don't think so. I think there was a stretch where he had a couple rough shooting games, and part of me was like, "Well, Keontae Johnson from K-State definitely has been fantastic this year." As much as I never want to give anyone props for that's wearing purple. So, but other than that, no, I thought it was going to be pretty unanimous. And then I have my fingers crossed for Player of the Year in the country. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but I think it'd be hard to argue against him winning Big 12 Player of the Year. So he was great from beginning to end. He stepped up as the number one scoring option, which people were kind of wondering who that was going to be. And he just grinds. He just gets buckets. That's really what it comes down to. So I think he's going to be crucial in March, especially because there's gonna be stretches where we're 10 seconds left in the shot clock and we got to get a bucket. And I think he's going to be the guy to get it.
Yeah, he definitely can't have any cold stretches the next month.
Him or
Uh,
Grady, no, they got to be on.
But Jalen had a very impressive season and has rightfully cemented his place in KU history and will definitely be getting his jersey retired down the line. Finished just under 20 points. A couple of those games hurt him not getting close to 20, but still put together probably one of the most impressive single seasons in KU basketball history, right up there with what Och did last year, what Udoka did a couple years ago, Devontae, Frank. And then going back to some of the earlier guys, Sharon and Cole back in their years, and then even before that. So Jalen, rightfully so, earns Big 12 Player of the Year. And it was evident that he was the Big 12 Player of the Year to me by the way teams defended him all season in Big 12 play. There were games where it didn't matter what he did, he could not get an open look because they were just crashing him, surrounding him, brick wall, nothing he could do to get open, but he still found other ways to impact the team. How about Coach of the Year? What are your thoughts on Jerome Tang?
Yeah, he's another guy. I understood the argument for Self, but I mean, Jerome comes in their first year with a roster with a lot of unknowns, some transfers, freshmen, all that good stuff. And I think they put together a really great season. So I will always give them props if they have a good season, even when I don't want to. So, but I think Jerome was great. But again, I do get the argument for Bill. I mean, Bill took a reloaded roster and won the conference outright. But I think Jerome Tang had a little bit less to work with, and I think what they did was pretty great.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I guess I shouldn't say unfortunately, but the way this award, and especially like in the NFL, NBA, the way this Coaching of the Year award goes, it's not always to the best coach or to the best coaching performance. It really
Yeah,
goes to the coach who had the lowest expectations and exceeded those expectations by the most. Again,
right.
not taking anything away from Jerome Tang because they had an amazing season,
They did.
incredibly well coached team. It's very obvious that Jerome Tang should have been a head coach years ago, and that Baylor was lucky to keep him around from a recruiting standpoint to keep building that program. Very, very impressive season. Just also think Bill Self had his best coaching year too,
I agree.
given the roster that he had. So,
I agree.
but props to Jerome Tang. Hopefully, K-State doesn't screw this up and let him leave for a bigger, better program somewhere else. Rest of the Big 12 awards there, anything stand out to you that you want to touch on? Oh, I
I
guess
think you could
how
have.
about Defensive Player of the Year? You had
Yeah,
several candidates there. DeJuan Harris, Kevin McCullough were probably front line. I think Gabe Kalsher out of Iowa State had a very, very solid year. But how do you feel about DeJuan getting that over McCullough?
you really could flip a coin with them. I think each of them kind of impacts the game a little differently. I think Dewan plays off ball exceedingly well. I think they both make great reads, and I think McCullough is the kind of the lockdown perimeter guy that you want. But I have no problem with Dewan winning it, and I think it's well deserved. It was going to be either him or McCullough. So I'm cool with having the two best defensive players in the Big 12 on the same team. That's fine with me.
And both of them have a legit shot at being first team all defense in the
In the
entire
country,
NCAA. And I'll
right?
take that going into March Madness because you have two guys that can lock
Yeah.
down the other team's best offensive guards or wing perimeter players. So I'll take that any day. Um, Nothing really else I want to point out on the Big 12 awards. I think the rest of that was pretty self-explanatory. I think Grady Dick getting all Big 12 second team made sense. Obviously, I don't know if he really was in contention for freshman of the year. I think Keontae George had a incredible
George is great.
season, and
Yeah.
it was Grady went cold a couple times. That really probably hurt his case, but he has a lot he can recover from. Um, so before we get into Big 12 tournament, let's just kind of touch on a few more things about how the season went. I want you to give me a couple highs and lows, whether it's player performances, team performances, or just things that, went well that you were excited to see or that surprised you, and then a couple things that kind of left you disappointed.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping for a backup guard performance to kind of show who's going to be that guy to come in when the one's on the bench. And I think Yesufu and uh, Pettiford, both of them were played well, but I was kind of hoping for one of them to kind of stand up and become the guy coming off the bench. And that's kind of really my biggest low I would say is the bench. Really, our depth. I'm not bought into it very much yet. I think Uday is fantastic when he comes in. He's
Oh,
energy. He catches
he's the
blocks.
next Udoka for sure.
He is. He'll be a 4 year player. He'll be incredible, or he'll develop and leave in two and go to the NBA, which would be awesome for him. But MJ never got healthy, never quite got healthy. It seems like he was always either sick or had an injury. So hopefully he'll come back next year and have a expanded role. But yeah, Pettiford and Yesufu, I didn't see a lot of consistency out of. Zuby was off and on as well, and then Clements and Cam Martin never really saw much of either of them either. So our depth is going to be pretty pretty big issue, I would say, going forward. And so that was probably the biggest low, along with the 3 game skid. That was some of the worst basketball I've seen played.
Yeah. It was funny coming into that stretch. KU looked like the best team in America, and then immediately you're like, yeah, they just got lucky. This team is bad. And then next thing you know, they rattle off 7 more wins, win the Big 12, and all is well.
Right. But aside from that, I mean, the highs, I just love the way we restructured, the way we self restructured that offensive play style. Because, like you said, we didn't have a traditional big that you can dump it in into the post and the spacing. I mean, it's not like they could draw a double and kick it out the shooters, but he made it work. I mean, it was a lot of high pick and rolls. I mean, Uday was able to come in and be kind of the roller and a good screener for Dewan. KJ, they were playing around the elbows was great. Jalen obviously slashes and collapses in the defense all the time. And Grady is such a good shooter that just him being out there is enough to affect the spacing on one half of the floor. Because if he's on that right wing, that entire right side of the defense is going to be hesitant to play off their guy because you have Dewan and Jalen who are good at passing out of the drive. And if Grady was wide open, if he had like a window of room, it was done. So I was just really impressed with the way we were able to do that because I was really expecting not a great year offensively. And then the last tile, I'd say, is the defense. We were just locked down the entire time, and we don't have like a traditional rim protector, but we don't let primary ball handlers get to the rim. That's kind of the best way to remedy that is just to play really good. You know, perimeter defense. And even guys that weren't looked at as defenders like Grady, they still did what they needed to do. And that made us a really good defensive identity team, which I think is fine. And I think that holds well in March. We've seen teams like Virginia who will win, games 52 to 47 win a tournament. So I definitely think there's room for a team like that to win.
Yeah, it was a little different looking team this year. Even though KU still averaged pretty high scoring as a team, it wasn't your typical, all right, Kansas is going to win by being the highest scoring team in the league. It wasn't
Right.
that kind of typical KU team. I was going to pull up their total. Yeah, so they averaged 75.6 points per game, which is still pretty solid.
Yeah.
They've averaged close to 80 before. But they held opponents to, so where did I just have that? Let me flip over. Oh, I just lost the stat. I'll have to find it later. But they held opponents to a pretty low scoring total and shooting percentage, which is, Bill Self basketball. That's what he preaches. As much as he wants to be a high scoring, efficient offensive team, they are always one of the best defensive teams in the league. And even though it took a little bit of time to get that going early in the season, but I think I was impressed with that too. And again, I think a lot of it does go to a high quality coaching performance by Self. He found out early on as much potential talent we thought this deep roster had. I mean, you had 13 scholarship players that could probably start on most teams, other places. Um, and we'll be the first to say we got this one wrong. If you listen to our second episode of our podcast ever a year ago after the tournament, we all predicted Cam Martin was going to be a huge piece of this team. And I will still give much love to Cam Martin. He had an incredible series of unfortunate injuries and things happened to him this season. Injured twice, injured the shoulder early, re-aggravated it. Pretty much missed the whole year. Got very little playing time when he was, so he never really had a chance. Hopefully, he's back next year. It sounds like he's getting a medical red shirt. I could also see him transferring and going somewhere else because we have a lot of bigs anyway. So we definitely got that one wrong. I think we got the whole 5 spot wrong altogether because we had 4 guys for that. And we did think KJ would be an impact, but we didn't think he would secure that spot all season. So I don't know where I was going before that. But defensively, yes, very good defensive team. I think offensively, what stood out to me was probably the development of KJ Adams. I don't think anybody saw him being a threat for a while. He single-handedly probably won us a few games and kept us in. Even that K-State game that we dropped on the road, without KJ's performance, there's no way that game's even close. So I was very impressed with what they were able to do with him. He kind of reminded me, I was thinking about this the other day, not as good of a shooter, but this guy was not a great shooter in college anyway, but kind of reminded me of Jeremy Grant back when he played for Syracuse. Long,
Yeah.
athletic, freakishly athletic, undersized big, but could hold his own defensively enough of the time to make a difference. Obviously, he struggled against guys like Sheboy and those bigger bigs in the paint, but I think I was pretty impressed with how he played. Like you two, I think I had more disappointments than anything else. And again, that's mostly because we're spoiled KU fans and we expect the best and we always deliver the best. But this bench was not good for most of the year. Pettiford and Yesufu had a few moments here and there, but early in the season, everyone was like, "Man, Bobby is the next Frank Mason." And then after that Tennessee game, then he had that game-winning layup. He basically disappeared the rest of the season. Joe, same thing, inconsistency here and there, plays wicked fast. But I think what's hard for this bench, and if you've watched Bill Self for the last 20 years, his rotation is super tight, regardless of how talented the team is. You go back even to the '08 national championship team, they basically played 8 players. And they were probably 10, 11 deep, and they only played 8 players. That's just kind of who Self is. And if you can't do the things he's trusting you to do, then you don't get playing time. And I think we saw that especially with MJ Rice, Zuby, Zach, all of them. If they couldn't handle themselves defensively, they get 2 minutes on the court, they get pulled right away, and they don't see the court for another couple weeks. Um, so I think that was disappointing, just the overall lack of production from the bench. But at the same time, I think some of that was due to the fact that our starting rotation was very, very solid all season. Got some bright spots with Uday towards the end. I think that gives you a lot of hope going into the next year. But I think the starting five rotation, for the most part, was one of the better fives in America. You knew you were going to get 20 a night from Jalen. You knew Grady was going to get open, get you 15 a night. And then all you were hoping for was some combination of McCullough, Harris, and Adams getting you another 20 to get you enough to get over the lack of production from the bench. And I think for the most part we saw that. I think Dajuan Harris had an incredible season, super underrated. He's not going to get enough praise for the year he had. Not huge offensively, but stepped up when needed, and I think he's actually primed to have a big March. So I again, I'm excited for the season we had. I think there's some concerns you could have going into March, but I think we're heading in the right direction for March. And to kind of kick that into Big 12 tournament play, we posted this on our Twitter page the other day, which you should follow us, by the way, at KCSA Pod on Twitter. We posted a question on who was going to be this year's team version of Mr. March. Years past, we saw Svi be that guy in the Final Four run. We saw Malik be that guy. So we put that poll out there for Dajuan Harris versus Grady Dick. And so far, as I'm pulling it up now, which we got a fantastic response, up to about 230 responses so far. Majority of those coming in on Grady Dick. So everyone's hoping Grady Dick lights up in this postseason and takes off. Dajuan Harris got 18 responses for being that guy, and then a couple other guys commented about Jalen, Kevin, and Yesufu. And I think kind of a sneaky pick for this would be Ernest Uday. I think he's coming in strong at the end of the year, and he might get some good minutes in the postseason going up against some bigger guys. So let's talk about the postseason. Who is your expectation to be this year's Mr. March?
Yeah, I'd probably have to say I'd probably have to agree and say Grady. I think you got a guy that can offensively. I mean, a big part of March is hitting threes and hitting free throws, and I trust him on both those fronts. I think he's a guy that can kill momentum if the team's on a 6-0 run and we get a Grady three. I think that's a really good stopper. So hopefully he heats up and stays hot throughout the tournament. I would say a sneaker for me would be Yesufu. I think he's a guy that plays really fast, plays at a quick pace. I could see him being a spark off the bench. I think a lot of game plans for KU are going to be centered around starting five matchups since the bench has been a little weaker. So, and again, you've seen that Yesufu can be a bucket. I mean, you saw him at Drake. What he can do. He can put up good numbers. So I think, it's always somebody that has been kind of a non-factor in the regular season will come in. I think he would be my pick for that guy off the bench. I could also see it be Uday. I could even see it be MJ Rice if Self doesn't yank him for missing three defensive assignments in a row. But offensively, yeah, I think it's going to be Grady or it's going to be someone off the bench. I will say I get the Dajuan factor too. When Dajuan looks to score, we're just a completely different team. It's incredible when he's passive versus when he is looking for his shot first. The way we play and the way you have to guard us is just night and day. So I think he could definitely have a big impact too.
Yeah, for me, when you look at March, the teams that traditionally own the month of March have fantastic guard play. So to me, that says if KU is going to compete at the highest level in March like we need them to, then Dajuan Harris has to be a major part of that, especially if teams are really pressing in on Jalen and he's struggling from the field. Dajuan's got to be a guy that can take over a little bit here and there. He can find some passing lanes. He can get to the paint, force a couple turnovers. I mean, there was a game. I can't remember exactly who we were playing now. It's drawn a blank, but he had like 6 steals. Might have been the West Virginia game actually. He had like 6 steals and 5 of them were in the first half in the span of like a 6 minute stretch. And there's just so much he can do to overtake a game in such a short time frame. So to me, I think the most important guy going into this postseason is Dajuan Harris, and I think he just needs to continue to elevate what he's been doing. Especially, Jalen's going to have his opportunities to score, but you also know there's going to be stretches where we just can't force anything through Jalen. And Dajuan to me has to be that guy. And then And then the other hope for me is Kevin McCullough stops shooting threes. He's open for a reason. He never makes them. He's made like three threes in the last 20 games. He's not an effective 3-point shooter. He'd be way more effective driving to the paint. Um, so maybe Kevin just get to the bucket. Do what you do best. You are one of the best on-ball defenders, perimeter defenders, off-ball defenders, and a very good defensive rebounder. So do what you do best, and let's leave the shooting up to Grady Dick and Yesufu. But as we look ahead to the Big 12 tournament, KU is fighting for the number one overall seed. I think it's obvious, like you mentioned, they're probably going to be a one seed regardless, but they still have potential to be the number one overall seed in the tournament, which the way they've been changing the tournament things, what that means for them is one, they get to pick the region they want to be in, and they get to pick the regional final spot. So for them, this would be uh, Kansas City being the regional spot and then playing out of Des Moines. So Des Moines being the opening weekend, Kansas City the following weekend on the way to the Final Four. Um, do you think KU has enough of an opportunity with the Big 12 tournament to earn that number one overall seed? Does it even matter enough? Just walk me through what you're thinking from a seeding perspective and how the Big 12 tournament could impact that.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see us have the number one seed. I'd like for us to get pick and have a friendlier environment for the later stages in the tournament. I think regardless if we don't win the Big 12 tournament, I think we're a one seed no matter what. I don't really see who else would have the argument. I think we have one of the most quad one wins and basketball power index, all the advanced, nerdy March Madness statistics that the selection committee looks at, we're topping all of them. So, and quite frankly, I mean, you look at Houston, playing in a weaker conference. I think that's going to hold some weight. Even Alabama, the SEC hasn't been great this year, aside from them, and Kentucky and I think Tennessee has been all right. But I still think, given the strength of our conference, even if we lose the Big 12 tournament, winning the regular season, I think means enough to where we're going to get that A1 seed, even if it's not the number one seed. So I think if we win the Big 12 tournament, that should be a lock.
And I would hope so too, because KU not only did they have the best Big 12 season, but they had the most quad one wins I think we've
Mm-hmm.
ever seen since
Yeah.
they've started tracking quad one wins. And for those that don't know too much about that, quad one wins are basically explaining your strength of schedule. So you're getting wins against top tier competition. And if I'm not mistaken, and Spencer, if you think I'm wrong on this, please let me know. But I'm pretty sure quad one wins are to teams that are in the top 30 rankings for the net ranking. So the
Sounds about
tournament the
right.
tournament doesn't consider your net ranking for seeding position, but they do look at quad one wins. And KU had more quad one wins than multiple conferences as a whole and multiple top 10 teams combined. So I think that should give them enough to get them the number one seed, hopefully, but they may need to make it to the Big 12 championship and win it. But just in general, what are you looking to see out of this Big 12 tournament from KU? What do you need to see to feel confident that they will have a deep run into the NCAA tournament and hopefully a potential repeat?
I would like to see some ugly wins. That would be nice. Ugly wins are my favorite kind of wins, and later in the season because that I mean, ones where we don't shoot well, like Jalen's going to struggle offensively, or we're not shooting well from the three. I want to see, okay, game plan number one, primary game plan going into the game doesn't work. How do we pivot? How well do we, does our defense hold us over? Do we just hit free throws down the stretch? So I'd love to see us win a grinded out game. That would make me feel really good uh, in March. And I'd like to see our shooting at least be respectable to the point where teams are going to give us a decent chance for good spacing. So, I'd like to see Jalen be able to hit wide open threes, DeJuan hit wide open threes. Kevin, if he's going to take one, love to see those go in. And then I would love if we can get good play out of someone for our bench. So if Uday keeps it up and keeps playing well, that would make me feel a lot better as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm looking I guess two things. Build a little bit of consistency on the offensive side. I'm not too worried defensively. I think we've got that down. But if we can get into a rhythm offensively and kind of get some of that momentum back heading into the tournament. I think that'd be great. And then I think the other thing I'm looking for is just how does the rotation look? Can we get meaningful minutes out of Yesufu, Pettiford, and Uday specifically? And then maybe if you get a couple minutes out of someone else on that bench, can they have a positive impact on the game? Because I think in what I anticipate happening in March, and especially just the way officiating's been this year as a whole, I fully expect KU to have to work through some foul trouble. And we've seen when that's the case, they struggle a lot, especially if
Yeah.
it's KJ, Kevin, or Jalen. Um, so can those bench pieces in the that 6, 7, 8 spot, can they provide positive, impactful minutes and then get some momentum heading into the tournament? How do you see the Big 12 tournament shaken down? So as of now, tournament starts on Wednesday. KU, of course, as the one seed, has the bye. So they await the winner of West Virginia, Texas Tech, which sounds kind of scary actually, because this isn't your typical year where one of those two teams is bad. Both those teams are incredibly good.
Yeah.
But how do you see the Big 12 tournament shaking out, and where does Kansas end up with that?
I'd say the way we looked against Texas, I'd be kind of afraid of seeing them or Baylor. So I want to see Keontae George again for the rest of his time at Baylor. So I think it's going to be one of those three schools that pulls it out. It's either going to be us, Texas, or Baylor. Those are really my main concerns. I could see a team like K-State or TCU kind of coming out of the woods and winning, but if that were my pick. I'm not as confident of going into the Big 12 tournament as I was in regular season, even for March, just because I think the Big 12 they're so geared to play Kansas and their game plan. They've already played us 2 times, so I think now it's almost like they perfected their scheme against us. So I'd be interested to see if Self can come up with some counters to if they're going to collapse on Jalen every single time. What do we go to then? How do you run plays for him off ball? Do you run plays to get him open, even if it's on the perimeter? So that would be my hope is that we can see some adjustments on that end to see if we can, a team that's got us figured out, maybe we can change that.
Yeah. TCU's I guess you could say, a dark horse candidate as the sixth
Mm-hmm.
seed. I could really see any team winning this Big 12 tournament this year. And, Iowa State could get hot. They're
Yeah.
probably the one of the top 5 best defensive teams in the entire country, and they could easily hold a team to under 50 points. I could see Baylor running away with it because they have the guard play. Texas is athletic enough, and they have good scoring. They could do it. I just hope to see KU play well. If we don't win the tournament, I don't think that has any impact on the NCAA tourney, but it would be nice to have that momentum, win the 3 games in a row, finish as Big 12 champs, lock in the number 1 overall seed, and then move into the tournament. So KU awaits the winner of West Virginia, Texas Tech. They will play Thursday at 3 p.m. West Virginia, Texas Tech play Wednesday night. We also have Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, which is probably the worst of those two, which is funny that Oklahoma State finished 7 ahead of Tech and West Virginia. And I would say both those teams are better than Oklahoma State, but definitely a lot of firepower in this Big 12 tournament. Going to be a lot of fun games to watch. And of course, we'll be awaiting the winner of that game to see who KU plays game 1 and hope that we can see a 3-day stretch where they finish out on top. Before we finish out, Spencer, just real quick, guys, we'll do an episode after Selection Sunday to talk about the tournament run. But I do want to touch on real quick just a couple teams you are hoping to avoid in the tournament, or teams that you think might be bad matchups. Because every year this happens where KU gets that one team in their bracket where you're like, son of a gun. Of course the committee puts them in our bracket. For me last year that was Creighton. I thought Creighton was a horrible matchup for us, because they've got bigs that could shoot, and that meant McCormick out there on the 3-point line. Thankfully, we made it through that game, even though they shot pretty well. But we had one of our best shooting games too. But this year, Spencer, who are a couple teams that you're looking to avoid that you don't think we match up well with?
I don't want to really where my concern would be. I don't want to run into a dominant big. I'd rather not play Kentucky with Sheboy. I'd rather not play Purdue with Zach Edey because at that point, I don't want KJ fouling out in the first 6 minutes. Uday coming in and also getting into foul trouble because I think our front court or is relatively there's not a lot of depth to it. So any team that can get us in foul trouble like that, I think that's going to be a bad storm brewing there. So I don't really want to see Kentucky, Purdue, even Tennessee, or even Baylor. I wouldn't run into Baylor either. Those would be kind of the ones. I think the cool thing about us having kind of a revamped rosters, I think we do have some versatility in terms of who we can play well against. Because if it's shooting, okay, great. We have guys that can close out quick. We have long, athletic guards that can contest even if they're late. So I'm not too worried about the three killing us this year. I'm more worried about it dumping into somebody inside who goes for 20 and 10 and gets us in foul trouble.
Yeah. I think for me at the top of the list is obviously Purdue, because who the heck's going to guard a 7'5" Zach Edey? And as we've seen, there's really nobody in college basketball that's held their own very well against him. But other teams, I would hate to see Arizona as the 2 seed in our bracket. They've got 2 7-footers in their lineup, and they are dominant 7-footers. Gonzaga, I think we would pair better with Gonzaga this year than last year, but I don't really care to see them. Definitely don't want to see any Big 12 team in the tournament. Not that the Big 12 ever fares that well in the tournament as a whole for some odd reason, but don't really care to see any of them. Kentucky, Tennessee, just because of the way they played us. The one that I keep going back and forth on is, do I want to see Arkansas? I'm not sorry, not Arkansas, Alabama, or would I rather avoid Alabama? That one I'm not quite sure on. I mean, if we saw them, it'd probably be in the Final Four of the championship anyway. But other than that, smaller teams, I'm not really too worried about, if we got Duke in there again, if somehow North Carolina made it. Maybe a Virginia team, just because of the way they play defensively, would give us a lot of struggle. Arkansas is actually a team, they're pretty well coached. They play aggressive. Maybe a team like UCLA, but I'm not too concerned. I'm kind of like you. I think we can fare well against most teams. We've got enough defensive versatility. But yeah, it's those teams that have the dominant big where they actually play through the paint that has me a little concerned, because KJ can hold his own most of the time, but if you get guys that just have the size on them, fouls are coming. Uday's going to be in there. You're trusting a freshman to hold their own. So again, I'm excited. I can't wait. This is my favorite time of year. You've got March Madness. You've got the NBA season coming to an end, and playoffs starting soon. MLB baseball starting to pick up here. Spring training's going on. NFL off season is getting started, and the draft's coming up. Probably my favorite sports month of the year has got to be March. And I'm excited that we do a podcast because we get to talk about it for fun. So like I said, guys, we'll do an episode after Selection Sunday, kind of recap the tournament bracket layout. And we're still throwing this idea around and hoping to solidify it, but we're wanting to do a bracket challenge this year with our listeners and friends. And I don't have an announcement as to what you win yet, but the hope is to have a free entry tournament challenge with a nice prize going to the person who takes first place. So stay tuned for that, or we'll put some details together over the next week and hopefully have a nice prize to give out at the end of March Madness. But until then, guys, make sure you follow us and subscribe to our podcast. You can find us on Spotify and on YouTube. Just search KC Sports Authority or at KCSA Pod. You could also find us on Twitter at KCSA Pod and over on Facebook as well. Wherever you do listen to us from, please hit that subscribe button. Share with all of your fellow Jayhawk friends. A lot more exciting things coming down the road. Spencer and I plan to do some more NBA stuff coming up as the season's winding down. We got plenty of March Madness content coming up, and then definitely going to do some more Chiefs offseason. So spread the news about us. We're still growing, having some fun doing this, and need all the support we can get. So thanks, guys. We appreciate you listening to us. Hit us up this week with your takes on how the postseason is going to go. Like I said, we've already had a lot of feedback on who Mr. March is going to be. Continue to provide us that feedback, and stay tuned for future episodes. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you listening. We'll catch you in the next episode.